So last week, if you missed it, I talked about a really comprehensive study that went into the impact of AI on worker burnout and engagement. And it was something else. In many ways, not surprising, but in many ways surprising. And so if you didn't catch that, I actually clipped it and I released that earlier this week. So if you only want to watch that part, you don't have to watch the whole thing. You can go catch that on YouTube. It's not on any of the podcasts, but you can catch that. This week, I came across another study that was really interesting. And the study was about the impacts of AI on creativity. So this was put out by a psychological organization. So just like last time, I'll describe the study because I'm always very, very skeptical when I say studies say, because so often people don't take the time to dig into the study and actually understand it. And so as I look at this study, let me tell you, I will not by any means say this study is 100% conclusive, because as I get into some of the limitations, no, but I think there are enough things that as I look across the broader landscape, it very much matches what I'm seeing in other studies, in other bigger things, what I'm seeing from a holistic workforce trend, and just the way AI is, we're adapting to it. So what this study was it was looking at how AI affects human creativity. And the way they did it was they focused on writing skills. So creative writing is where they narrowed the scope. Now, in terms of size of study, and this is where I say, don't go say, well, this is conclusive 100% for sure, because it really only included 293 participants, and they were not professional writers. So in some ways, I actually really respect that, because it wasn't designed to be, hey, these are professionals and let's see how it's doing. It was really to look at the average person to see, hey, how does AI affect their writing? And well, I guess so anyway, that's what it was. I misspoke on the participants. There were 600 and then 293, so what, like 900 people. So it was a decent sized study, not small, but not exactly, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. So keep that in mind with it. The other thing that I think was really interesting, or that you have to be careful, is when they look at it, it was what they had to write was just an 8-sentence story. So we're not talking, write a white paper or write a novel or anything like that. So again, the scope of it, and I guarantee people could tear it apart and say, well, that's not really measuring creativity. I don't think that's the point. You also have to look, they were using one-shot approaches to AI, which I think is another thing to be careful of. So if you look at how they used AI, when they tested it, writers were, so there were 3 groups. There was do it just human, then just AI, then AI with humans type of a thing. And one of the things you have to be careful of is, again, there's limitations in that, because you can say, well, they used AI and it didn't make them better. But in these one-shot experiments, it's like, well, they were only allowed to ask one question. They couldn't sit and iterate on what they are, which really, in my opinion, is where AI can be really good. So there are some limitations to that. I also doesn't say much about their experience with AI. So, how good are they at prompting and all this? I'm not trying to dismiss the value of the study. I just want people to be objective about the kind of study. But what came out of it, I think, was really interesting in that the study showed generative AI actually increased the novelty and the usefulness of the stories versus just human only efforts. So when they compared people to people with AI, and again, these are just average people, they are not professional writers, classically trained in all this stuff, it actually made them more creative and their stories were more interesting with it, which doesn't surprise me. My own personal experience, I do a lot with AI generated images. They really help me with some of the stuff. And I'm not, while I did design work, I am out of practice with it. And if you ask me to go into InDesign or, anything like that and create something, I'm not that kind of a designer. But I like visual, compelling imagery with it. And a lot of times there's something that's in my head that I could never put in artwork. And AI is really good for that. And so it doesn't surprise me that you have people who are average people, writers, being asked to come up with a creative story, which they maybe in their head have some concept of it, but they're struggling with figuring out how to put together. And what it showed was AI actually improved it. The people actually did better when they had that AI helping shape and mold that. And so it helped them brainstorm ideas, which was another one. It showed, they had access to AI generated ideas. So maybe they didn't know where to start. AI was able to give them some, what if you did this? What if you did that? Which then really kickstarted it, which doesn't surprise me. But again, I think it's really helpful. And what they found was it really had a positive impact on less creative writers. Now, one of the interesting things about it, though, was the evaluator perspective was really interesting. Um, while objectively the stories were better with AI involved in it, the evaluators, the human evaluators, were more critical of the stories when AI was on there. And I think that's something that we have to be really mindful of. And anybody thinking about this or who's using AI, we still are in this stage where there is this perception from people that if you're using AI to help you, it's like a crutch, like somehow I'm going to hold you to a higher standard. And I don't necessarily think that's inherently bad, but I think it's something we need to be mindful of. I think if people do have this assistance, if they do have things like that, it ties to the worker burnout thing. And I think this is where we have to be so careful as we draw the line. Is it reasonable to say, hey, you have AI to help you with this? There should be an improvement in quality or speed of what you're creating because I know you now have some help. I think there is some room for us to do that, but I think we also have to be careful. And so as I looked at the data on evaluator perception, they were pretty critical of this stuff. And I think that's what we're seeing with some of the AI burnout stuff relating to last week's study is we haven't quite landed where our perception of AI use is where it should be. And we can tend to be either we believe it can just do incredible things or we're overly critical when it gets involved. And so I think that's something that we have to be really careful of. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting about AI with this was when they actually looked at just the AI stories. People say, oh, AI is creative. It can do all this stuff. It has creativity with it. When they actually compared the stories that were purely AI generated, while they might have been decent stories, they were very robotic. And I think that's good news for us as people that this, well, again, while a small study showed that, okay, could AI write creative stories? It could. Would AI create creative writive stories? Creative stories? Not really. As you look into the data, it looks like, well, they all kind of felt the same. They all kind of had the exact same kind of plot and themes and risks that kind of came in. And so that very much matches what I see with a lot of the stuff out there where I think anybody watching and listening to this, our ears are perking up and we're picking up more. This feels very AI-ish. This feels very robotic. It feels very bland. And so I think in some ways, this just goes to some of the other things that I talk about at length where people still play a really unique role. And the data continues to show to me that that's not going away. While it may change, because I think there's a lot of what we do that is robotic in nature and we don't realize it. And when you think about writing a story, how many different story styles are there? Things like that. But I think this is where we're going to continue to navigate that. Well, what is truly dynamic and unique from people and what is not? But it was encouraging to see that when people really looked at those AI stories, they went, yeah, I mean, they're good, but they all kind of feel the same. And so I think in terms of takeaways from this, if you're someone who's still anti AI, who's avoiding it, saying, I'm not going to use it because there's just something better about me doing it by myself, I would encourage you to be more active in using it as a partner, as something to help you get started with things, as something to help stretch you where maybe you have limitations. Like I said, for me, I am not a graphic designer, so I can't come up with graphic design. If I wanted something really professionally produced, I would go to a graphic designer who specialized in that, who I would hope is using AI to make them even better. But for those things where I go, I need a graphic, but not to the level I need a graphic designer, AI actually stretches my ability. And so for anyone who's not doing that yet, I would very much encourage that. But I think really ultimately what the takeaway for this is that this is continuing to show that AI plus people done right. And I think that's where, as I looked into the way they structured it, there are things I would do differently about the study. And as I, support and advise companies, I spend a lot of time helping companies figure out what is that, where do we draw that line? What are the things that AI is involved in? What are the things that people are involved in? And it's not an easy, here, AI does this, people do that. There's some really hard work that has to happen. But I think this study is yet another little notch in the camp of, hey, we're going to be working together and we're just going to further integrate